A racist white woman refuses to sit next to a black man on a flight, completely unaware that he's the pilot in command. Watch the shocking twist unfold and let us know where you're tuning in from. It was a clear Friday morning at Atlanta International Airport, one of the busiest hubs in the country. Travelers rushed through the terminals, balancing coffee cups and luggage, all hoping to get to their destinations on time. Among the crowd was Eleanor Richards, a well-dressed woman in her late 50s. She wore an expensive beige coat and carried a designer handbag. Eleanor had spent her life valuing appearances and status, and she made sure everyone around her knew it. Eleanor's flight to Miami was boarding soon, and she had already scoped out the first-class lounge, enjoying a glass of wine before making her way to the gate. She liked to travel in style, often bragging about how she only flew first class. Today, however, her journey would not go as smoothly as she expected. At gate C12, passengers began lining up, handing over their boarding passes to the gate agent. Among them was Marcus Gray, a tall black man in his mid-30s. He wore a crisp navy blue uniform with gold epaulettes on the shoulders and carried a leather flight bag. Marcus exuded quiet confidence as he checked his phone and waited for the right moment to board. Eleanor glanced at Marcus as he passed by her in the boarding area. Her eyes flickered with a mix of curiosity and judgment, but she quickly looked away, assuming he was just another traveler. When her boarding group was called, Eleanor stepped forward, flashing her ticket to the gate agent with a smug smile. She walked down the jet bridge and into the first-class cabin, where she was pleased to see her plush window seat waiting for her. As she settled into her seat, arranging her bag and jacket, she noticed Marcus entering the cabin. He paused briefly to let a flight attendant pass, then continued down the aisle. To Eleanor's horror, he stopped at the seat next to hers. Her expression immediately soured as he placed his flight bag in the overhead compartment and sat down. Eleanor's discomfort was obvious. She shifted in her seat, crossing her arms and glancing at Marcus with barely concealed disdain. She leaned over and flagged down a flight attendant. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice low but firm. "There must be some mistake. I specifically requested a seat that suited my preferences. I don't think this arrangement will work." The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, looked confused but professional. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Is there an issue with your seat?" "Yes," Eleanor said bluntly, lowering her voice further. "I don't want to sit next to him." Sarah's eyes flickered to Marcus, who was calmly looking out the window, seemingly unaware of the conversation. Sarah's professionalism didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in her expression. Disbelief, perhaps. "Ma'am, this is the seat assigned to you. I'm afraid I can't change it unless another seat becomes available," Sarah replied. Eleanor huffed, clearly unsatisfied. "You mean to tell me there's nowhere else I can sit? First class should have better accommodations?" Sarah glanced at the seating chart on her tablet and shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The flight is completely full." Eleanor pursed her lips, muttering something under her breath about lowering standards. She didn't address Marcus directly, but made a point of avoiding eye contact with him. For his part, Marcus remained silent, his face calm and composed as if he hadn't heard a word. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Eleanor's irritation grew. She leaned as far away from Marcus as she could, pulling out her travel pillow and attempting to ignore him. She even requested another glass of wine before the plane left the gate, muttering to herself about how her travel experience was being ruined. Marcus, however, seemed unbothered. He quietly looked over a notebook in his lap, occasionally jotting down notes. He didn't react to Eleanor's behavior, though he couldn't help but notice her pointed size and exaggerated movements. The plane took off smoothly, and the first hour of the flight passed uneventfully. Eleanor, despite her annoyance, eventually drifted off to sleep. But when she woke up, she noticed something that surprised her. Marcus was no longer in his seat. Looking around the cabin, Eleanor didn't see him anywhere. Confused, she assumed he had gone to the restroom or perhaps moved to another seat after all. Feeling somewhat relieved, she stretched her legs and relaxed for the first time since boarding. But then something caught her eye. As the flight attendants began preparing for the in-flight announcement, a familiar figure appeared at the front of the cabin. Marcus was standing there, holding a microphone. He adjusted his pilot's hat and smiled warmly at the passengers. "This is your captain speaking," Marcus began, his voice clear and steady. "We're currently cruising at 35,000 feet, and I'd like to thank you all for choosing to fly with us today. We're expecting a smooth ride, and we'll be landing in Miami, ahead of schedule." Eleanor's jaw dropped. She stared at Marcus, her face a mixture of shock and embarrassment. The man she had spent the entire morning dismissing wasn't just another passenger, he was the pilot of the flight. Eleanor couldn't believe what she was seeing. She blinked, hoping she was mistaken, but there was no denying it. Marcus, the man she had refused to sit next to, was now standing confidently at the front of the cabin, addressing the passengers as the captain of the plane. She felt her face flush as the realization hit her. Her earlier comments, her dismissive attitude. It all came rushing back in vivid detail. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat, hoping no one else noticed her embarrassment. But she wasn't invisible. The flight attendant, Sarah, who had dealt with her earlier, caught her eye briefly and gave her a knowing look. Marcus finished his announcement, thanking the passengers for their attention, and stepped back into the cockpit. The first-class cabin was quiet, but Eleanor could feel the weight of her shame pressing down on her. She avoided eye contact with everyone, especially the passengers sitting nearby. For the rest of the flight, Eleanor couldn't relax. Her earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by a nervous energy that made her fidget in her seat. She replayed her actions over and over, cringing at her behavior. She had judged Marcus based on nothing but her own biases, and now she was faced with the undeniable fact that she had been entirely, embarrassingly, wrong. As the plane began its descent into Miami, Eleanor's heart raced. She wanted to leave the plane as quickly as possible, but at the same time she felt a nagging urge to say something, to apologize. She had never been good at admitting her mistakes, but this was different. She couldn't just walk away from it. When the plane landed and the passengers began disembarking, Eleanor lingered in her seat. She watched as people filed out of the cabin, many of them thanking the flight attendants and glancing toward the cockpit where Marcus was standing, bidding passengers farewell. Eleanor felt frozen, unsure of what to do. Finally, when most of the passengers had left, she stood up. Clutching her handbag tightly, she made her way toward the front of the plane. As she approached the cockpit, she saw Marcus standing there, his demeanor calm and professional, as he nodded to the departing passengers. When he saw Eleanor, his expression didn't change, but there was a quiet awareness in his eyes that told her he remembered everything. Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice shaky as she spoke. "Captain Gray," she began, her words hesitant. I wanted to say I'm sorry for earlier." Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "I didn't realize who you were," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. "And I said things that were unkind and unfair. It wasn't right, and I deeply regret it." Marcus regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, he nodded and offered her a small smile. "Thank you for saying that, ma'am," he said. "But it's not about who I am. It's about how we treat people, no matter what we think we know about them." Eleanor felt a pang of guilt at his words. He wasn't angry or dismissive, just honest. She nodded slowly, realizing the truth in what he said. "I'll remember that," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded again, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Safe travels," he said simply, turning his attention to the next passenger who approached. As Eleanor stepped off the plane and into the bustling airport terminal, she felt a strange mix of emotions: embarrassment, humility, and a determination to change. For the first time in a long time, she was forced to confront her own biases and see the world through a different lens. Marcus returned to his duties, unfazed by the incident. For him, it was just another day doing what he loved, flying planes and breaking stereotypes along the way. But for Eleanor, it was a day she would never forget, a humbling reminder that respect and kindness should never depend on appearances. The lesson was clear. We all share the same skies, and it's time we learn to see each other as equals under them.